Hi, welcome to Homeschool Together. This is the second video in our Zero to Homeschool series. We're trying to get you up and running in your new homeschool. But before we get into too many things about curriculum and homeschool spaces and educational laws and things, we need to talk a little bit about terminology. When you're talking with seasoned homeschoolers or you're looking for curriculum, there are many different terms that are involved, and we just want you to know some of the basics so that you can speak with those folks and understand what might be the best fit for your family and for your learner. So I want to talk about some of the traditional educational approaches. So classical is the first one I wanted to discuss. This relies on classic literature and the arts. It's very much a teacher-student driven traditional educational style. And then there's Charlotte Mason, which you may hear, which is based on living books. That's people that are either intimately involved with the subject or are experts in the subject. There's also copywork and narration involved with Charlotte Mason. There's Montessori, which is more of child-led, and they choose what work they want to work on. It's very hands-on, focuses on life skills. You'll often see a lot of preschools that do Montessori. Then there's school at home or traditional. You'll see it done both ways, but that's really more of a traditional classroom type setting. You know, teacher lectures, student takes notes, student does work on their own. That typical, it's basically transporting the classroom to your home environment, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It might be the perfect fit for your learner, but when you hear school at home or traditional, that's what they mean. And then if we want to talk about some of the more eclectic educational approaches, we can talk about unschooling. You may have heard of unschooling, and it can mean a lot of different things to different families, but basically this is child-led learning, where children are choosing what they're interested in, and that's what you're facilitating, whether you do leverage a curriculum. So maybe let's say your child is really interested in learning Japanese, so you might find a Japanese curriculum for them. It doesn't mean that you don't use curriculum, it just means that children drive that education approach. So the next is game schooling, and this is using tabletop games, either board games or card games, or you could use video games too for educational purposes. This isn't necessarily like a be-all and end-all. This may just be something that you do to supplement whatever normal educational approach you use. But if you hear game schooling, that's what it means. The next thing is unit studies. These are really popular and I think a great way to get started. If you're not sure what curriculum you want to go with, you can do a unit study. So let's say we'll spend 2 weeks working on volcanoes and then 2 weeks on sharks, and you gather resources from your library. So you've got books, maybe videos, maybe you do a science project and some art activities all about that one topic. And that's a unit study. And it can be as long or as short as you want them to be, but you'll hear unit studies that are sometimes going to be 12 weeks and unit studies that are 1 day and everything in between. So just know that unit study is a focused time on a specific topic. And then you might hear some different curriculum terms. So you'll hear spiral versus mastery. And what does that mean? So mastery is where it's going to teach you a subject and you're going to repetitiously practice. Let's say it's math problems. We teach this concept of addition. Your learner's going to practice until they master it before you go on to the next subject. Whereas something like spiral learning means that you're going to touch on that addition. They'll do a little bit of practice. Then we're going to move on, and 3 chapters down the road, we're going to come back to that topic again. It's going to keep spiraling around and you're going to keep hitting. And each time that you get to that subject, you're going to go just a little bit deeper into it and a little bit more in depth. So depending on how your student learns best, spiral versus mastery is a decision that you might need to make in curriculum. The other thing to understand about curriculum is they'll talk about things like scope and sequence. Scope just means this is what the curriculum covers. It's going to cover all about this specific time in history, let's say. And the sequence is going to be in what order. So we're going to study ancient Rome first, and then we're going to study ancient China, and then we're going to study, so it's the scope and in what order you do it, the sequence. You're also going to see something called spines versus extensions. Now, a spine is a book that a curriculum intends to use repeatedly throughout the year. It's kind of the anchor of the curriculum. So it may be like a main reference book that you might use. If it's a history curriculum, for example, it might be this main time in history and there's an encyclopedia on that time, let's say. And then you're going to have extensions. These are other books that you're going to add into the spine to enrich the learning. It might be a really great chapter book or another reference book or some other art-based book or something that would be an extension. So spines are usually the ones you buy. Extensions are the ones that you get from the library, typically. The other thing is you'll hear manipulatives. Manipulatives is exactly what it means, something you can do with your hands. So this is especially common in math curriculums. Some of them just have workbooks and textbooks, and some actually have physical manipulatives, blocks or balance beams or abacuses, and things that you can actually work with your hands. And that's particularly good for our learning styles. Our first one, kinesthetic learners. Those are learners that like to touch things with their hands, they like to manipulate things. They need to be hands-on to really learn well. Young kids are particularly kinesthetic in learning. And then you have auditory and visual learners, and those are pretty self-explanatory. But you'll hear that different curriculums are best for visual learners or kinesthetic learners, or maybe an online curriculum with a lot of audio component is great for auditory learners. These are just a few of the terms. We have 2 in-depth podcasts about homeschool terms, so if you find yourself lost with other things, you can check those out. They're down in the show notes, and I think that that'll be helpful. But these are the basics just to get you started.